continue to bring authors and new books to you. I am particularly honored to host Bill Konigsberg in conversation with his editor, David Levithan, as they discuss Bill's book, The Bridge. The book, as described by Bill in the back matter, is, quote, an effort to show as objectively as possible in a fictional environment all the possibilities for two young people who are struggling with suicidal ideation. If you or someone you know are experiencing depression or suicidal ideation, please get help immediately. You can call the National Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-SUICIDE, which is 1-800-784-2433, or you can call 1-800-273-TALK or 1-800-273-8255. Either of those numbers will put you in touch with a trained volunteer who will listen to you and provide the resources you need. Those phone numbers, if I went too quickly, will be available in the chat throughout the conversation, and I will mention them later on so you can easily access them. Also in the chat, you can find links to purchase The Bridge, this amazing book, and other books as well. If you have a question, you're going to click the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and add it there. We would love to hear from you. You can also upvote questions that you like and want answered. We're going to head on to the event you've all been waiting for. Bill Konigsberg is the author of 5 books for young adults, which have won honors, including the Stonewall Book Award, the Lambda Award, the Sid Fleischman Award for Humor, and the Penn Center USA Literary Award. Bill lives with his husband, Chuck, and their 2 Labradoodles, Mabel and Buford. David Levithan has written and edited numerous books for young adults, many of them bestsellers. His most recent book, The Mysterious Disappearance of Aiden S., as told to his brother. You may also know him as the co-author of Dash and Lily's Book of Dares, or from his first novel, Boy Meets Boy. He had, as Bill said, the gargantuan task of editing The Bridge. Bill and David, I want to thank you so much for being with us this evening. I can't wait to listen to your conversation about The Bridge.
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. All right, here we are. So great to see you, Bill, and so great to be talking to you about The Bridge. We've been doing it for a little while, but we both love Politics and Prose so much. It's just such an incredible store.
Absolutely.
And since we couldn't quite be there in person, it is really great to be there virtually. And so thank you to Politics and Prose for having us. And yeah, it's just gonna be great. The good thing is it's been a while since we've had an event talking about The Bridge. And so even the old questions will seem a little new, right? I mean,
I had to go back and look up names. It's been a little while, so I'm really glad to be doing this.
So I guess the first thing to do is not to assume that everybody watching knows what The Bridge is or what led you to read it. So my first question is the most obvious question, which is, again, could you talk a little bit about The Bridge and what did compel you to write it?
Sure. So I wrote The Bridge several years ago when there was really what seemed like an epidemic of suicides in the city where I live in Phoenix, especially among young people. I was working for an organization that was dealing with young people in crisis, and I was seeing it also in the writing community, and it just felt like it was something that I had to say because I have a background with dealing with chronic severe depression, and I also had a suicide attempt in my 20s, and I decided it was sort of like coming out again. You know, I'd written 5 books with LGBTQ protagonists, and this one also has a protagonist who is gay. However, this felt like a departure for me, and I was going to be talking about something very different. So the premise of The Bridge, when I decided to write, it's about a boy and a girl, both 17, who meet atop the George Washington Bridge in New York, where I grew up. They're both there to jump and they interrupt each other. Then, based on what happens the moment that they are sitting about 100 feet apart, both with one leg over the railing, the world actually splits into 4 different realities. So in the first reality, the girl, Tillie, jumps, and we get the aftermath of that choice that she has made to die by suicide for her family. And we also get the aftermath for Aaron, the boy, and his decision not to jump. When that story is over, we go right back to that same first moment. And this time Aaron jumps and Tillie doesn't. And we've gotten to know Aaron, so that is quite a hit. And we get to see what happens to his family based on that. And we learn more about Tillie when she decides not to jump. In the third story, they both decide, they both jump. And we get the impact on people that we've met in the first 2 stories, and also some people we haven't met deep in the future whose lives are forever changed by the absence of these 2 people. And then in the fourth story, my favorite, they both decide not to jump. And a bond is created between these 2 strangers that is life-saving and life-changing for both of them. So that's what the book is. And I'm so glad that I wrote it, and I'm so glad I don't have to write it again. It was a challenge.
No, I mean, absolutely. Can you talk a little about the evolution of the book? I mean, again, was it always in the 4 parts? Did you always know that they would be in that order? Did you always know that? I guess an interesting question, which I don't even know, strangely, that I've ever asked you this question, even though it's an obvious one, is also I'd love to talk about why you decided to do it with 2 people, because you easily could have used that structure with just one person. Again, there wouldn't be 4 variations, but you could do 2 variations. What made you decide to do it with 2 people, 4 variations?
Interesting. It's a question I haven't gotten, and the truth is I don't know. I think it just appeared to me as an idea with 2 people.
Yeah.
And I was really interested. I think probably one reason I did that, so I was interested in the butterfly effect, and I think that the butterfly effect is more noticeable with 4 variations rather than 2.
Right.
What was the first question? I forget now.
So just that you always decide to structure it this way, right, in that order. Yeah.
Yeah. The first time that I started to write it, and through the first draft, I actually was writing it chronologically. So it was like story 1 appeared and we'll call it story A appeared and chapter 1. And then I moved right over to the B story and I wrote chapter 1, followed by a C. I didn't have a story in which they both jumped. I had envisioned that as perhaps a final chapter with 1 page as an article. And I decided that was too grim. I really like to write books with hope. So I didn't do that. And David knows this, but really he came to me with the idea that perhaps I should write that story, but that it should be the 3rd story. But back to the way that I wrote it, it was extraordinarily confusing to write and actually even worse to read. So I sent in the first draft that way, and it was just impossible to keep track of characters in 3 different storylines. So it was a learning process. I'd never written anything speculative like this. And at the same time, I was dealing with very, very serious issues that, the feelings that I, basically almost ended my life at 27 to not feel are in this book, and they're imbued into the 2 characters. They're both, Aaron and Tillie are both parts of me and separate. And I had to go revisit those and feel those again. And that was tough.
Yeah. And one thing, I think one of the reasons we are doing an event now is it's Pride. It's June. We are used to doing events about that. But I want to expand the usual basis of the Pride questions, because I was thinking about the book in terms of Pride. Mm-hmm. And in terms of that the characters, both queer or not queer, one of the things that they actually have to find is pride in themselves. And if anyone, Tillie actually has the harder journey in terms of her self-perception being so off. So could you sort of riff a little bit about sort of how pride plays in the book? And again, not in the usual June way that we talk about it, but more about the way that we need to take pride in ourselves?
Yeah, you know, these are two characters who absolutely have very sort of funhouse mirror ideas of who they are. They just have taken the worst possibilities of who they are and expanded. And so their self-image, both of them have self-images that are very, very poor. And I can relate. I certainly can relate as a teen. I think that writing about pride is probably something that is intrinsic to me without even thinking about it, that it's just sort of like, that's my life journey. And so every time I write a book, I'm writing about, I always write about 17-year-olds. All of my characters are 17. And so in some ways, they are all looking to find that individuation, that understanding of who they are, and that love for who they are. And Tillie, it's so funny. She's so different than I am and so similar. I don't think anybody who reads this book would be like, oh, that's Bill Konigsberg. But we have a lot in common. And the other thing I want to say about the pride question is that the one distinction I like to make with this book is, we've read books, I think, many of us have at least, that are books about teens who have wanted to die by suicide because they are gay. And this is really a book that's different. It's really a book about a teen who is gay, who wants to die by suicide, and he's gay. So it's not because he's gay. And I think that that's a big difference. This idea that our identities color every part of our lives. And I definitely wanted to look at that. There's really not a lot of homophobia in this book.
Well, and I think it's interesting, again, and it is a contrast to your other books too, is that they're also the love stories that drive the book are not your typical love stories. I mean, really, it's the love of family and the love of self that is really the driver. I mean, again, one story doesn't really have much of a love story at all, and one does, but it's not by any stretch the driver. So did that feel different to write, to really not be focusing on boy falling in love with boy and trying to navigate it, but really to take that almost out of the equation and to really focus on the other kinds of love that the characters need?
Yeah, the last two books I've written have been interesting for what I've had to omit, and they were both journeys to get to that. With my book, The Music of What Happens, I had to get rid of the idea that every book about two gay boys had to include coming out. Right. That was just something that I had to be there because I had always written that, I'd always read that. So I had to take that out. And here, absolutely, the love interest was not a main part of the story. And I think one of the reasons it wasn't is that I don't like that sort of artificial idea that a person can save another person. Like, that's not what we're doing here. We're really looking at the individual journey to getting somewhere where one can, realize that staying another day is the right option. And it most certainly is for both of these kids.
And did you find one character easier to write than the other?
Tillie, who is adopted and Korean American, in some ways was easier to write because she is so, I could just plug into her anger. She's a character who really feels alone and feels separate from her family. And that comes right from me being 16 and 17. But the way that she winds up expressing her anger felt extraordinarily cathartic, and in some ways it poured out of me. Aaron, on the other hand, is a little cringy to write because he's so much like I was. And one of the secrets about this book that is that Aaron is a songwriter, and Aaron's songs come directly from my songbook when I was 16 and 17. So I was using the lyrics that I thought at that age were so great. And I'm just going to say they're not the worst song lyrics of all time, but they just are 17-year-old song lyrics. And Aaron is so earnest about them and so wanting to be famous that it's a little cringy feeling.
And what do you think 17-year-old Bill would think of like, if you had gone back in time and been like, hey, these songs you're writing are actually going to appear in a novel, however many decades later, do you think he'd be psyched that future Bill ended up using them? Or would he be like, really, that's how they turned out? Like,
oh, I think he would have been ecstatic about it. I mean, you know, the idea that I was going to become a singer was, you know, severely was a problematic idea because I don't sing that well. So, you know, that becomes a problem.
Yeah.
But, you know, details.
Again, as somebody who writes lyrics and puts them in novels because he knows that he will never actually be able to write and sing a song, I am so there with you. All right, I'm going to cheat a little bit in the I know something that the audience doesn't know, but I'm going to not dwell on it, but I'm dying to ask this question, so I will. So I happen to know we are working on your next book right now. Mm-hmm. It is set in New York in the 80s.
Yes.
And so I'm curious, going from writing a book set in New York now to a book set in New York in the 80s, like what did you feel or experience the city differently while writing the two books? Because one, it's like you're going back sort of to when you were young in the city, but it's a different time. And then one, it literally is the time when you were young in the city. And did that feel different?
Yeah, that's an interesting differentiation. I would say that the 1980s version feels like home. Uh-huh. So writing, the book is called Destination Unknown, and writing those scenes felt like coming home to something, and there's a lot of nostalgia there. The scene of New York City in current time, I don't live in New York. And so it just, yes, I was going back to my teen years, but nothing that happens in the book is remotely connected to how I lived and where I lived. It's just the place that I wrote about. So I hope that the New York scene is written with love, especially the 80s version. I mean, because there is love there.
Yeah. I mean, to not to dwell on a sad topic, but one of the first conversations we had was about the choice of the George Washington Bridge, and we've both written novels with gay boys on the George Washington Bridge contemplating suicide. And for me, with Two Boys Kissing, it was very much because of Tyler Clementi and being haunted by that story, which again is interesting. I feel that as time has passed, I don't know that it is necessarily as much on the consciousness on a teen reader now as it was, again, 10 years ago. But I'm curious, I mean, how much was that on your mind, sort of, and the use of the George Washington Bridge when you were writing it? Did you think about that at all, or did it just feel that you were really focusing on the characters?
You know, I was very moved with the Tyler Clementi story, and so I think that is probably in a lot of ways the basis for it. But also, I grew up in an apartment on Riverside Drive facing the Hudson River, and if I would peer out to the right from that apartment, there was the bridge, and so it felt like a no-brainer. Like I would write about that and not the Brooklyn Bridge because it wasn't a part of my teen experience. You know, I was a West Side boy, so I made these kids Upper West and Upper East Side, which relates to how I lived. My father lived on the Upper East Side, and my mother lived on the West. So,
and it was interesting as we were working on the book. I was very grateful because I would commute back to New Jersey on the George Washington Bridge some days, and I love now there's netting everywhere. It would actually be impossible for your characters to do what they're doing. And normally an editor would be like, oh my goodness, we have to change it. But instead I was like, well, good. I'm glad that this is impossible. But I would like to sort of segue from that to talk about, I mean, I know that you obviously, when you were dealing with issues like suicidal ideation, like depression, it does, as an author, you take on a mantle of responsibility that you do not have when you're writing a romance between two boys.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You have to have this extra layer of consciousness of what a potential reader might react to, and be responsible for that. And you were so hyper aware of that. So I would love for you to talk a little bit about that. What added layers of scrutiny you sort of had to give the book because of the subject matter you were writing?
I think the biggest one that I had to do was to make sure there was nothing ever intriguing or sexy about the possibility of suicide. Like, that was the number one. A lot of this book was written in reaction to another book. I sort of hate that I wind up talking about 13 Reasons Why in a negative. I think there are good things about that book, but I do think that it treats suicide in a way that's far too glamorous to be good for young people. I went up to the George Washington Bridge, and that really helped me be hyper aware, because I will tell you, the feeling of being up on that bridge was just awful in that way of doing research for the book and standing in those places. There's nothing sexy about it. It is extraordinarily awful. And, I was just very aware of that as I was writing, that the things we want to do for young people is we want to imbue them not with false hope, but with hope at the end of a book, and that we want to be absolutely real, and paint the picture of what it truly is. Because I think it'd be very hard to read this book and be like, I don't want to make any statements that are unfair. It's just, as I was writing the book, I was really aiming to write a book that would be very hard for somebody to think this is something I want to do. So.
No, and again, I think you were incredibly successful at that.
Yes.
Because that was something, again, that we were all very aware of, because we knew, you stated out right at the beginning, this is what I want from this book. And I think everybody involved in it, down to the copy editors, were just looking at it to make sure that everything really felt that way.
Yeah.
All right, I had warned you I would ask this question, and I will tell the audience that this is a question that came up in another Q&A, in another reading, and this will inspire you to send in your own questions, the Q&A thing down there, because if it's a great question, I'll keep using it at different events. But somebody in the audience asked the panel that I was on this question, which made me think a lot, which was, who is your favorite character in literature, or a favorite character in literature that you have not written? And then when you consider it, what are the similarities or differences between that character and your main characters in your book?
I think that, first of all, I'm taking away anything that you wrote as well, because it's just, there are characters in your books that I adore. One of them that came to mind when I was thinking about this today was Darius, from Darius the Great is Not Okay, and Darius the Great Deserves Better. I love that character. I think I love his dry wit, his earnestness, how much of a misfit he is, how he struggles with his family feels very on point for me as a person, and when I think of myself as a teen. I think that, I sometimes I'm a big into reading as a writer, and so I do a lot of times I will study a chapter, and I've studied that book, and I'm in awe of that book because of the way that it is so beautifully simply written, and my characters simply cannot shut up. So that's probably the biggest difference. I think our characters would get along very well. I would think that, if Adib and my characters met, they would hang out and be happy.
I like that answer a lot. Again, I think we've discussed this question in other forums, but I, again, would love to talk about it here. The notion of your evolution as a writer, and sort of as you write more books, and again, I am the same way, you sort of want to take on different challenges. And again, with The Bridge, clearly you set the bar for yourself extremely high, and you totally got over it in a beautiful way. But it's unlike anything you wrote before, and you can see, again, and this is not any disrespect for your previous books, because I say this again about myself and books like Two Boys Kissing, that you look at it and you say, there is no way 30-year-old writer Bill or David, just starting out, could have ever written this book. There's just not. We needed to write 3 or 4 books leading up to it in order to be able to. But then once you've written it, you know that you can do that, and then you go on and challenge yourself more. So I'd love for you to talk about sort of what you see your path has been as a writer, and then what do you want to explore going forward that is different from what you've done?
Well, yeah, it seems like with every book I take on at least one new challenge, and I think that's because I bore easily. I'm not somebody who's able to write the same thing over and over again, and so they all do seem to pick up something new. The Bridge was an absolute challenge. Destination Unknown, the one that you're editing right now, was a different sort of challenge. I can't say harder, just different. I hadn't written anything that was historical before. And frankly, I hadn't really written, although I wrote some in the Porcupine of Truth about AIDS, I hadn't written with that as like the main subject. And that's what the book is about in a lot of ways. It's amazing. I wonder if anyone in the audience will relate to this or not. All my life, I knew that I had to write an AIDS book because I've read everything that has ever been written. I've lived so much of that experience. And you get there, or I should say I got there, and I found myself a little bit just silenced. I just couldn't quite figure out how to say something new, something that felt worthwhile. So that challenge is still ongoing. We're still editing that book. I think that the pandemic took from me some of my confidence. It sent me into a severe depression. I couldn't write for about 6 months of that period at all. So I'm right now just getting my confidence back, and that will change this answer. But I will tell you that one of the things that I see for myself in the future is to write some adult stuff. I think that's coming. I've been working on an adult novel. And the big difference between adult novels and young adult novels is that I can't know as much about the lessons that I know in the young adult novel as I'm writing the adult one. I'm in the middle of it. And I'm living and experiencing and writing at the same time, but I really feel alive doing that. In terms of young adult stuff, I think probably we're going to see some more historical from me. That seems to be where I need to go next.
Yeah, no, again, I think I'm so excited that you're doing that. And again, it is interesting to me, again, reading and editing Destination Unknown. I mean, it's fascinating, it's not double bind. I don't know what the phrase I'm looking for is, but I guess double consciousness that we have to have. Mm-hmm. Again, writing about AIDS, a topic that you and I certainly have read about and know about, but at the same time, understand that we are writing about it for people who don't have this knowledge. And again, it's a very fascinating, because again, you think, oh, I've heard this story before, but then you have to remember, oh, this is actually for an audience that does not know this story. I'm grateful to hear about it. And it's interesting. Have you read the Sarah Schulman book yet?
Oh,
the one that just came out. I mean, about ACT UP. It's like going to be basically my summer reading assignment. Is like it's long, but I'm so excited to read it because it seems so comprehensive.
Oh, I'm glad that I'll be reading it after I'm done writing.
Right. Yeah, you probably want to wait. All right.
What a wonderful conversation.
I would say we're at 7:30, and I know there are some questions, and we encourage people to send in more. But yes, Anna, welcome back.
Thank you. And thank you so much for this great conversation about process and about this very important book. So we are moving on to the question and answer part of the event. You still have time to share your questions using the button below, the Q&A button. You can also upvote other questions that have been asked by other participants. I see that there is a question by Virginia that we didn't actually get the question. So Virginia, if you'd like to resubmit that, we really appreciate appreciate it. And just a quick disclaimer that the author and editor are really eager to chat about the book, but they are not trained to take personal questions regarding mental health. And so I just want to repeat that the numbers for the suicide hotline are in the chat. If you need them at any time, please use them. And either number will put you in touch with a trained volunteer who can listen and provide the resources you need. So the first question that we have here is from Sam, and it says, Bill, did you find it difficult to write about the suicides and do that research you were talking about, given your history? Did you experience some PTSD? How was that for you?
It's a good question. I would say that I didn't. I expected to, though. I really thought that that was a possibility. And because of that, I was very, very careful about how I set myself up here. I to put into my writing process time to decompress, people to call every day so that I wasn't sort of alone with that place in my mind, which is an unpleasant place. So yeah, I didn't, though, experience that, and I'm glad about it. And I think that that's something we anytime we write challenging things, and I've also written about sexual assault, and that's a similar kind of thing where PTSD is a possibility. We have to be very mindful. That's all.
You mentioned this briefly, the butterfly effect, and my takeaway after reading The Bridge was just the infinite ways that a single life or the loss of a single life affects the people and the world around us. And you mentioned in the C chapter that there's a longer timeline, and I'm wondering if that long timeline exploration was always part of the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it wasn't, and then it was. It was when David, told me, I think after draft 2, that he thought that that was a good idea. Maybe it was draft 1, I don't recall. It felt like it had been there the whole time, that it was exactly what I needed to do, because somewhere in the process of writing this, as I said earlier, I'd kind of written, by timeline at first. And in doing so, there was a lot more butterfly effect in the book that then got kind of taken away because it wasn't the story, it wasn't the main part of the story. So this was really an opportunity to really delve into that. So I was so grateful for that idea.
So again, if you want to add your question to the conversation, please just post it in the Q&A. So talk therapy is crucial for both the characters at one point in the book. Can you speak at all to the importance of therapy and mental health resources in general?
I mean, they're everything. I am somebody who grew up with 2 therapist parents. I'm somebody who was put in therapy very young. And while there are times that I complain about that, it was very, very, very valuable to me to have that experience and to have been helped at a time when, I think as in my experience of being a teenager, it was just this time of a flood of things going on, and I just couldn't keep track of everything. And there was no way, it's like I was in trauma 24/7. And I think a lot of teenagers feel that way, that it's just all coming at them and it's not stopping. So to be able to get to a resource, to a person who will listen on a phone, to a person who, the Trevor Project is a great example. They have things where you can use Trevor text and text somebody, or even therapy. It's just invaluable. And I really wish more people would use it.
And I think, I'll just jump in to say, I think that is actually one of the great things right now in general about YA and YA literature, in terms of talking about therapy and talking about treatment and talking about medication in a way that just even probably 5 years ago was not as serious as it is now. And again, I think if you look at older YA or even children's books like Charlotte's Web, like the therapist was always the comic relief, it was just a joke, oh, you have to go to the therapist. Or then sort of it evolved to something like Robert Cormier's I Am the Cheese, where the therapist was just basically the framing device, was just the silent person that the main character talked to, but they never actually helped. They just sort of sat there and listened. And I'm so just, it is encouraging to me that so many authors, including Bill, are really including that and saying to teens who are reading and adults who are reading, like, this is a path that you can take. There's no shame in it. There's no hesitation to do it. Sometimes it works better than others, but it will always take you seriously. And I think that message has been heard loud and clear by the readers to a very positive effect. And I think that we underestimate the power of that, the normalizing that is occurring right now, because again, I don't think it was normalized before. And now if you read YA literature and books like The Bridge, it feels completely normal. And I love that.
Yeah, absolutely. Something that you also mention in the book, Bill, I believe in the back matter, is that at one point you were sort of spoken to about speaking about suicidal ideation, and here we are having this conversation. And can you talk a little bit about the importance of just talking about it?
Yeah, it's very, very important to me. That story, just so it's understood what I was writing about, and this is in an author's note. I was chastised while doing a tour for the Porcupine of Truth, where I was talking about my experience, and my experience includes a suicide attempt at 27. I was spoken to very harshly by the woman who was running an LGBT organization, saying that I had done great harm by talking about it. And I guess the fact is that I see it very differently than that. I see it, I think we need more conversation. This wasn't a story where I was saying, hey, try this, kids. It was saying, look at what happened. I had thought at this time at 27 that my life had no meaning. And here I am today to say, how was I wrong? Boy. So I want the stigma to go away. I want everybody to be able to talk about this issue, because it is in the silence that these issues lurk, and they're most dangerous there. So that is my belief.
I'm going to switch to a different tone a little bit. We do have an attendee who has asked the question, how do you, Bill, work with David as editors? And David, how does your writer self mesh with your role as an editor?
I would love to hear from David on that, because that interests me.
Oh, great. You're gonna make me.
We're throwing it to you, David, first. How is it to be both a writer and an editor?
No, I mean, they're very separate in my mind. When I'm working on somebody else's book, I am trying to make them sound like the best version of themselves. I'm certainly not trying to make them sound like me. Obviously, the ability to, as a writer, go into the voices of different characters obviously helps me as an editor to go into the voices of different authors. And I do think it is a skill that you can hone both at the same time. But mostly my job, I mean, as an editor, really is a job as a reader. And it is my lifelong experience as a reader. When I'm looking at Bill's books, I am the role, the writer role is nowhere near my mind. The reader role is like paramount. I am the representative of the readers, and I am supposed to make sure that, again, everything makes sense and is the best version it can be. So I think there's that. I will say, though, which is totally true, I was an editor for 10 years before I published Boy Meets Boy. So the editor identity was actually firmly in place when I started. And I will say, and this amused my authors 20 years ago when I started writing to no end, that there are definitely things that you cannot totally understand from the author's point of view until you were an author yourself, like the deadline. It's really abstract as an editor. It is not abstract at all as an author. But also, I think the kinship that Bill and I have in our authorial lives does absolutely help the editorial process. Again, I know Bill's readers. They are very much similar to my readers. I know, again, what is important to them. I know how his books will be meaningful to them. So again, I'm not putting myself in the writing position for them, but I am putting myself in their position. And because I write for them too, I do actually know them more than I would have had I just been an editor. And that, I think, hopefully helps.
Wow. So I don't mean to embarrass David, and I know he embarrasses a little bit easily, but I will tell you how he is a genius. I mean, there are many ways in which he is a genius, but the way that I know that he's a genius is that as he edits, and this is one thing I found out with The Bridge, which was our first collaboration, I'm about to find it out again, I'm sure, with Destination, is that it's almost as if he hears where there needs to be more and where there needs to be less. It's instinctual. And he would sometimes write, there needs to be a paragraph here. And I had never gotten that before, but I come to understand where it comes from. You know, it's extremely helpful to have somebody who understands the rhythm of the book.
So we're going to start closing things down a little bit, and I'm wondering if you've done a lot of these conversations over the last year, I'm sure, but I wonder if there's something that nobody has asked you that you always think, why don't they ask me this? So is there a question you always wish that you had gotten from folks?
Yes. At 50, how did you get to stay so darn good looking?
Oh, I'm so sorry I didn't ask that one.
I mean, that's probably the only one. No, I don't know. I think, I'm sort of, my brain is a little bit mushy right now. I can't really come up with anything. David, does anything come to your mind?
I'm trying to think of things we've never talked about. I think it's interesting to me, and again, you will correct me if I'm wrong, and also, I was not there for the full evolution of this book, but it is very rare for a book always to have the same title. And yes. So was it The Bridge from the very start? Was there ever any conversation about it being anything other than The Bridge?
It must be that I'm getting better at titles, because that title was from the very first moment. Never changed. And I hope that Destination Unknown is another one that I got that way. All of my first titles I was so far off on. Openly Straight was No Place Like Home.
Huh.
The Platypus of Truth. I mean, I had all sorts of bad titles that didn't work.
Titles are so hard. So hard.
Except for the rare time when they're really easy.
They're really easy, and it's nice.
All right. So that is all the time that we have left for our questions. And thank you so much for being with you. Thank you, audience and participants, for all your great contributions and questions. I want to remind you that you can still click on the link in the chat box to get your copy of The Bridge. And The Mysterious Disappearance of Aiden S. by David Levithan also. You can follow our Children's and Teens Department on Twitter or Instagram at Kids and Prose. And the handle is also posted in this chat. You can also watch this event again or watch past events on Politics and Prose's YouTube page. You're going to go to the Children and Teens playlist for this one. And we hope that you'll share this important conversation with other people who you love. I want to thank everyone again. Keep reading widely and expanding your world, and stay safe. Thanks.